When a 20 million credit ancient weapon requires 800 pounds of draw weight, most species call it ceremonially impossible. Humans call it Tuesday. Dr. Kess Drakmore just outbid half the galaxy's elite collectors for a bow that supposedly no living being could draw, while war beasts the size of starships are tearing through 3 separate military task forces like they're made of tissue paper. The galaxy's about to learn that sometimes the difference between impossible and Tuesday is just a matter of who's holding the weapon. Before we continue the story, if you're new here, make sure to subscribe to HFY Havoc, hit the bell, and like this video. Because if you want more epic HFY sci-fi stories like this one, you don't want to miss out. Because what happens when humanity's forgotten past collides with an impossible present is about to redefine everything the galaxy thought it knew about ancient weapons, apex predators, and exactly who built the technology everyone's been studying for millennia. This isn't just another HFY story. This is archaeology with a body count. The Meridian Antiquities Exchange buzzed with the kind of hushed reverence typically reserved for funeral parlors and tax audits. Floating display cases drifted through climate-controlled air, while holographic price tags flickered like dying stars, each number representing enough credits to purchase a small moon or a politician's conscience, whichever proved more affordable. Dr. Kess Drakmore stood before Lot 73. Hands clasped behind her back in a pose that suggested either deep contemplation or chronic lower back pain. The artifact suspended before her defied easy categorization, which explained why half the galaxy's most pretentious collectors had gathered to bid on something they couldn't possibly understand. "Magnificent specimen," wheezed Collector Vorthak, his respiratory apparatus hissing like an overworked espresso machine. The Zeltharian's compound eyes rotated independently, one focused on the bow while the other tracked potential bidding competition. Pre-hegemony craftsmanship. Notice the molecular bond weaving in the limb structure. Ceremonial, obviously, added Merchant Prince Quillen, her crystalline form refracting the display lighting into prismatic rainbows across the auction floor. The draw weight specifications are purely symbolic. 800 standard pounds minimum? Preposterous. Even our strongest combat servitors max out at 650. Kess remained silent, studying the weapon with the intensity of someone reading their own obituary. The bow stretched nearly 2 meters from tip to tip, its dark material seeming to absorb light rather than reflect it. Ancient hegemony text spiraled along the grip in characters that made most universal translators catch fire and void their warranties. "You're assuming it's ceremonial," she said finally, her voice carrying the dry confidence of someone who'd spent decades proving experts. "Wrong about dead civilizations." Vorthak's breathing apparatus stuttered. "Dr. Drakmore? I hadn't noticed you among the bidders." "That's because I'm not here to bid," Kess replied, then paused for effect. "I'm here to buy." The nearby collectors exchanged glances that somehow managed to convey both amusement and concern across species barriers. Quillen's crystalline structure chimed softly, the equivalent of polite laughter. "With respect, Doctor," Quillen said, "your reputation precedes you. Brilliant xenoarchaeologist, certainly, but this piece requires appreciation beyond academic interest. The starting bid alone exceeds most university department budgets." "Most departments don't have my publication royalties," Kess observed. "Turns out writing about how everyone else got ancient civilizations wrong pays better than originally getting them wrong." The auction began with the ceremonial dignity of a diplomatic reception and the underlying tension of a bar fight. Auctioneer Drylex, whose species had evolved from something resembling a cross between an accountant and a praying mantis, called for opening bids with mechanical precision. Lot 73, Pre-hegemony warbow, provenance verified, estimated age 12,000 standard years. Authentication certificates available upon request. Opening bid, 2 million credits. Vorthak's paddle rose immediately. Quillen countered without hesitation. Within minutes, the price climbed past 5 million, while Kess observed the proceedings with the detached interest of someone watching a particularly boring sporting event. 7.5 million, Vorthak wheezed, his breathing growing more labored with each bid. 8 million, Quillen chimed, her crystalline form now pulsing with competitive excitement. Fascinating, Kess murmured, loud enough for nearby bidders to hear. You're all convinced it's decorative. Of course it's decorative, snapped Curator Belthorn, a Thracian whose tentacles writhed with indignation. The engineering specifications are physically impossible. No known species possesses the biomechanical capability to draw such a weapon. No known species, Kess agreed. How charmingly limited. The bidding continued its upward spiral. 10 million, 12, 15. With each increment, the crowd's attention shifted increasingly toward the human xenoarchaeologist, who stood motionless as a statue, while fortunes changed hands around her. 18 million, Quillen announced, her chiming now carrying an edge of strain. 18.5, Vorthak countered, though his breathing apparatus sounded like it might require medical attention. 20 million, Kess said quietly. The auction floor fell silent except for the gentle hum of life support systems and the sound of Vorthak's respiratory distress. Every eye, compound or otherwise, fixed on the human who'd just doubled the previous bid increment without apparent effort. 20 million credits, Dralex confirmed, his mandibles clicking with surprised approval. Do I hear 25? Vorthak's paddle trembled in his appendage. Quillen's crystalline structure had dimmed to a sullen amber. The other bidders looked like they'd just watched their retirement funds evaporate. You cannot possibly be serious, Belthorn hissed, his tentacles now writhing with something approaching apoplexy. 20 million credits for a museum piece you couldn't even display properly without specialized mounting equipment. Who said anything about displaying it? Kess asked. The implications of that question rippled through the crowd like a small earthquake. Collectors began whispering among themselves in languages that sounded like everything from crystalline wind chimes to dietary distress. You're suggesting, Quillen said slowly, that you intend to use it? Revolutionary concept, I know. Using tools for their intended purpose, rather than admiring them from across a room. But the draw weight, Vorthak began, is precisely what makes it interesting, Kess interrupted. You're all so focused on what's impossible that you've missed what's probable. Dralex cleared his throat with a sound like grinding gears. 20 million credits stands. Do I hear 25? The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable, then progressed through awkward into downright painful. Finally, Dralex's mandibles clicked with finality. Sold to Dr. Drakmore for 20 million credits. Congratulations on acquiring Lot 73. As the auction moved to the next item, some trinket that would probably only cost half a university's annual budget, the crowd's attention remained fixed on Kess. She approached the display case with the careful reverence of someone handling live ammunition, which, given the circumstances, might not have been entirely metaphorical. Dr. Drakmore, Quillen said, her crystalline form now pulsing with curiosity rather than competition. If I may ask, what makes you think you can succeed where physics suggests failure? Kess smiled, the expression carrying enough confidence to power a small starship. Simple. You're all assuming this weapon was built for people like you. She turned towards the auction house's transaction desk, leaving behind a room full of collectors who suddenly felt like they'd missed something very important indeed. Behind her, the empty display case seemed to mock their certainties about what was possible and what wasn't. The bow would be delivered to her ship within the hour. Then the real test would begin. 3 days later, in her private research laboratory aboard the starship Theoretical Certainty, Kess discovered that 20 million credits purchased more than just an ancient weapon. It also bought a front-row seat to cosmic irony. The bow lay across her examination table like a sleeping predator, its dark surface unmarked by the molecular scanners she'd subjected it to. Every test confirmed what the auction's documentation had, claimed the weapon required an impossible draw weight that would challenge the structural integrity of most known biology. "Still convinced you made a sound investment?" asked Dr. Marcus Webb, her research partner and the ship's resident voice of unwelcome reason. He perched on a lab stool with the practiced ease of someone who'd watched Kess make questionable decisions for the better part of a decade. "The investment isn't the question," Kess replied, running her fingers along the grip's carved inscriptions. "The question is why someone would engineer a weapon that supposedly no one could use. Ceremonial significance? Religious totems? Artistic expression? Pick your favorite explanation for impractical ancient technology." Webb's tone carried the weary patience of someone who'd had this conversation before, in various forms, usually involving Kess acquiring something expensive and mysterious, while he provided counter-arguments that she systematically ignored. "Marcus," she said, not looking up from the weapon, "how long have we worked together?" "Long enough to know that tone means you're about to justify something inadvisable." "Have I ever been wrong about hegemony artifacts?" Webb considered this question with the gravity it deserved, mentally reviewing their collaborative history of supposedly impossible discoveries that had somehow proven embarrassingly possible. "Define wrong," he said finally. "Wrong. Incorrect. Factually inaccurate. Academically humiliated." "No," Webb admitted with obvious reluctance, "but your track record doesn't make this bow physically possible." Kess finally looked up, her expression carrying the dangerous gleam that preceded her most audacious theories. "What if it's not about possibility? What if it's about necessity?" Before Webb could formulate a response that adequately conveyed his skepticism, their conversation was interrupted by an incoming transmission. The laboratory's communication array chimed with the particular urgency reserved for official government channels that couldn't be ignored without risking imprisonment. "Dr. Drakmore," came the crisp voice of Admiral Chen Voss, whose military bearing translated clearly even through subspace static. "I need to discuss an urgent matter with you." "Admiral," Kess acknowledged, activating the holographic display. Voss materialized as a translucent figure whose expression suggested he'd rather be commanding a fleet action than requesting academic consultation. "What can I do for the Combined Defense Initiative?" "We have a situation on Kepler 442c. You're familiar with the colony there?" "Frontier agricultural world, established about 15 years ago. Population around 50,000, mostly human with some Altarian traders." "Why?" Voss's image flickered as he consulted his data pad. 3 weeks ago, seismic activity in the northern continent exposed a series of previously unknown subterranean chambers. The colonists found them while investigating mineral extraction possibilities. "Let me guess," Webb interjected. "They found something they shouldn't have touched it anyway, and now you need someone to clean up the mess." "Close," Voss said grimly. "They found stasis pods, hundreds of them, and whatever was inside is now very much awake and extremely hostile." Kess leaned forward, her interest sharpening. "What kind of stasis pods?" "Hegemony design, pre-collapse era based on our dating estimates. The creatures inside—" Voss paused, clearly struggling with his next words. Our xenobiology teams are calling them war beasts. Each one stands roughly 4 meters at the shoulder, weighs approximately 8 tons, and appears designed for one purpose: killing everything in sight. Combat deployment? Webb asked. 3 separate task forces: Altarian shock troops, human marine battalions, and Thracian siege units. Standard military doctrine, combined arms, overwhelming firepower, tactical superiority. Voss's expression grew darker. The beasts tore through them like they were training exercises. Kess felt something cold settle in her stomach, though whether it was dread or excitement remained unclear. Casualties? 70% losses across all units. Projectile weapons can't penetrate their hide. Energy weapons cause superficial damage at best. Even orbital bombardment only slowed them down temporarily. How many creatures are we discussing? Current count suggests 47 active specimens, with more pods showing signs of revival. The colonists are evacuating, but these things are faster than our transport capacity. Webb glanced between Kess and the bow lying on the examination table, his expression suggesting he was beginning to understand why their conversation had taken this particular turn. "Admiral," Kess said carefully, "what exactly are you asking me to do?" "Our research teams have been studying hegemony military technology for decades, without making significant breakthroughs. Every expert we've consulted agrees that these creatures represent apex biological warfare development, but no one can suggest effective countermeasures. Except our historical analysis suggests that the hegemony built these creatures to serve specific combat roles. Logic dictates they also developed methods to stop them, either for control purposes or to counter enemy deployments of similar assets." Kess looked down at the bow, its dark surface seeming to pulse with anticipation. Around them, the laboratory's equipment hummed with quiet efficiency, while the weight of cosmic coincidence settled over the conversation like morning fog. "You think this weapon was designed to kill those creatures?" she said. It wasn't a question. "I think," Voss replied, "that we're running out of conventional options, and your reputation suggests you specialize in unconventional solutions." Webb cleared his throat diplomatically. "Admiral, with respect, the weapon in question requires draw strength that exceeds known biological parameters. Even if Dr. Drakmore's theory is correct, the practical application presents insurmountable challenges." "Dr. Webb raises valid concerns," Voss acknowledged, "but our alternative options are limited. We can attempt colony evacuation under combat conditions, or we can glass the entire continent from orbit and hope we don't miss any specimens." "Neither approach addresses the fundamental problem," Kess observed. "You'll still have creatures with unknown capabilities and no effective countermeasures. Precisely why I'm consulting the expert on hegemony warfare technology." Kess smiled, though the expression carried more determination than humor. "Admiral, I'll need transport to Kepler 442c within 12 hours. "Dr. Drakmore," Webb said urgently, "you cannot possibly be considering." "Considering what? That maybe, just maybe, someone built this bow for exactly this situation? You're betting 50,000 lives on a theory about ancient weapons engineering." "No," Kess corrected, lifting the bow from its examination table with careful reverence. "I'm betting 50,000 lives on the possibility that some problems require old solutions." Voss's hologram nodded with military precision. "Transport will be ready within 6 hours. And doctor?" "Yes?" "Good luck. You're going to need it." The transmission ended, leaving Kess and Webb alone with 20 million credits worth of potentially impossible ancient technology, and the growing certainty that they were about to discover whether impossibility was simply a failure of imagination. Kepler 442c looked like someone had decided to redecorate paradise with craters and smoldering debris. From the observation deck of the military transport, inexorable logic, Kess watched smoke plumes rise from what had once been thriving agricultural settlements. The planet's twin moons cast an ethereal glow over destruction that managed to be both beautiful and horrifying. "Cheerful place," Webb muttered, adjusting his field gear with the enthusiasm of someone preparing for dental surgery. "Really captures that post-apocalyptic vacation destination aesthetic." General Thax 9 materialized beside them with the silent efficiency that made Altarian stealth technology simultaneously impressive and unnerving. His triangular head tilted toward the planetary surface below, multifaceted eyes reflecting the orange glow of burning settlements. "The evacuation proceeds ahead of schedule," he reported in the clicking, whistling language that universal translators rendered as perpetually sarcastic commentary. "Civilian casualties remain minimal, though infrastructure damage approaches total." "What about the creatures?" Kess asked. 49 confirmed active specimens as of this morning. 2 additional pods achieved revival during the night cycle. Thax 9's mandibles clicked with what might have been frustration or amusement. The distinction remained unclear across species barriers. They appear to be establishing territorial boundaries. "Territorial?" Webb frowned. "That suggests intelligence beyond basic predatory behavior." "The beasts demonstrate tactical awareness, coordinated hunting patterns, and adaptive responses to military countermeasures," the general confirmed. "Initial assessments of primitive biological weapons have proven inadequate." Kess hefted the bow case, its weight reassuring in a way that probably indicated unhealthy psychological attachment to ancient weaponry. "I'll need to examine one of the creatures before attempting engagement." "Dr. Drakmore," Thax 9 said, his voice carrying the patient tone reserved for explaining obvious concepts to dense civilians. "These organisms have withstood concentrated fire from plasma artillery, kinetic bombardment, and chemical warfare agents. Your proposed approach involves a projectile weapon that requires impossible physical capabilities." "General, with respect, your combat assessments have proven somewhat unreliable so far." The Altarian's compound eyes rotated independently, a gesture that probably indicated offense, though it might have been admiration. "You propose to succeed where 3 military task forces have failed using pre-industrial technology?" "I propose to test a theory using appropriate tools." The transport shuddered as it entered atmospheric approach patterns. Below them, the northern continent stretched like a wounded animal, its landscape scarred by impact craters and the peculiar geometric patterns that suggested the creatures moved with purpose rather than random destructive impulse. "Landing zone secured," announced Commander Torres over the ship's communication system. "Perimeter established at safe distance from confirmed creature activity." Safe distance, Kess reflected, being a relative concept when dealing with 4-meter-tall apex predators that treated military hardware as mild inconvenience. The landing proceeded with the organized chaos typical of military operations under pressure. Equipment deployment, perimeter establishment, sensor array activation, all conducted with the grim efficiency of people who'd seen their colleagues torn apart by impossible monsters. Kess stepped onto Kepler, 442C's surface, and immediately understood why the colonists had chosen this world. Rich soil, perfect atmospheric composition, gravity within comfortable parameters. Someone had invested considerable effort in creating an ideal agricultural environment. The war beasts had invested considerable effort in destroying it. "Observation post established 12 kilometers from nearest confirmed creature location," Torres reported, his armor scanner painting target acquisitions across the devastated landscape. "Dr. Drakmore, are you certain about this approach?" Kess opened her bow case, lifting the weapon with practiced care. In the planet's natural light, the ancient craftsmanship seemed even more impressive and more impossible. "Commander, certainty is a luxury we can't afford." She tested the grip, feeling carved inscriptions that seemed designed for hands remarkably similar to her own. The bow's limbs stretched far beyond anything she'd handled before, their dark material humming with potential energy that suggested technological integration beyond simple mechanical engineering. "Initial draw test," she announced, positioning herself according to traditional archery stance. The first attempt nearly dislocated her shoulder. The second attempt actually did dislocate her shoulder, requiring field medical attention and creative profanity in 3 languages. "Perhaps," Webb suggested diplomatically while the medic reset her joint, "we should reconsider the theoretical approach." "Perhaps," Kess countered through gritted teeth, "we should consider that I'm doing something wrong." "You mean besides attempting to draw a weapon that violates basic physics?" "I mean besides attempting to draw it like a conventional bow." She studied the weapon more carefully, running her fingers along the grip's inscriptions. The hegemony text seemed familiar, though her translation remained fragmentary. Something about harmony, synchronization, biological integration. "What if it's not purely mechanical?" she mused aloud. "Meaning? Meaning, what if the bow requires more than just physical strength?" Before Webb could formulate a response, their theoretical discussion was interrupted by practical urgency. Commander Torres's scanner array erupted in warning signals, while seismic sensors registered massive movement approaching their position. "Contact," Torres announced with military precision. "Single specimen, bearing 27 Mark IV, distance 800 meters and closing." Through the observation post's reinforced viewing ports, they watched death incarnate emerge from the devastated landscape. The creature stood precisely 4 meters at the shoulder, its hide gleaming like polished obsidian armor. 6 legs moved with predatory grace, while sensory appendages tested the air for threats or prey. "Range 600 meters, Torres updated. "Still approaching. Recommend immediate withdrawal." "Negative," Kess said, lifting the bow again. "This is what we came for." The creature paused, its massive head turning toward their position with unmistakable intelligence. For a moment that stretched into eternity, predator and prey regarded each other across impossible distance. Then Kess understood. The bow wasn't designed for physical strength alone. It was designed for biological synchronization, a weapon that required the user to become part of its function rather than simply operating its mechanism. She placed her hands on the grip and felt something shift. Not mechanical movement, but a subtle resonance between her nervous system and whatever alien technology powered the weapon. The inscriptions along the grip began to glow with soft phosphorescence. "Dr. Drakmore," Webb said urgently, "whatever you're doing." "I'm doing what this bow was built for," Kess replied, and drew the string back in one fluid motion. The weapon responded like a living thing, its impossible draw weight becoming manageable as alien technology interfaced with human biology in ways that defied every engineering principle she understood. The creature charged. Kess released the string. The arrow materialized from nowhere, or perhaps from the bow itself, streaking across 800 meters of devastated landscape faster than human eyes could track. It struck the war beast center mass and detonated with force that shook the observation post's foundations. When the dust settled, the creature was gone. Not dead, simply gone, as if erased from existence by an equation that had decided its presence was no longer mathematically valid. "Well," Webb said into the sudden silence, "that was either completely impossible or remarkably effective." "Sometimes," Kess observed, lowering the bow with hands that still tingled from alien interface technology, "those are the same thing." The bow's inscriptions faded back to inert darkness, but she could still feel its potential humming beneath her skin like an additional heartbeat. Whatever connection she'd established remained active, waiting. 48 creatures remained, and she was just beginning to understand what she was really carrying. The final confrontation came at dawn, when the surviving war beasts converged on the evacuation site with the methodical precision of a military operation, which, Kess realized as she watched them through her scope, was exactly what it was. "Coordinated assault pattern," General Thax 9 observed, his compound eyes tracking multiple targets across the ridgeline. "They've learned from our previous engagements and adapted their approach accordingly." "Adapted how?" Commander Torres asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected the answer would be unpleasant. "They're hurting us, forcing evacuation routes toward predetermined kill zones while maintaining tactical superiority through elevation and numerical advantage." Kess checked her equipment one final time. The bow felt different now, less like a weapon, and more like an extension of her own nervous system. The interface connection had grown stronger with each use, creating a feedback loop that was either evolutionary advancement or gradual insanity. 47 remaining targets, she announced. "I count at least 30 visible from this position." "Dr. Drakmore," Webb said quietly, "are you absolutely certain about engaging this many simultaneously?" "Marcus, I stopped being certain about anything the moment I discovered this bow can rewrite local physics." The lead creature emerged from behind a shattered grain silo, its obsidian hide scarred by previous military encounters, but apparently undamaged. Behind it, more war beasts materialized from concealment with the coordinated timing that spoke to sophisticated tactical planning. Kess drew the bow, feeling the familiar tingle as alien technology synchronized with human biology. The connection felt deeper this time, not just interface compatibility, but something approaching recognition. The first arrow took down the lead beast with the same reality-defying effectiveness as before. The second eliminated a flanking specimen before it could complete its advance. By the third shot, the remaining creatures had stopped their assault and begun retreating. "They're withdrawing," Torres reported with obvious confusion. "Tactical withdrawal, maintaining formation discipline." "That's impossible," Thax 9 clicked. "These organisms demonstrate aggressive territorial behavior patterns. Withdrawal contradicts their established behavioral profile." Kess lowered the bow, though she kept the string partially drawn. Something was wrong. Not with her weapon, with the creature's response to it. "They're not retreating," she said slowly, pieces of an impossible puzzle beginning to align in her mind. "They're regrouping." For another assault? Number for something else entirely? The war beasts arranged themselves in a precise geometric formation across the valley floor, their positions too organized for random animal behavior. As Kess watched through her scope, the largest specimen moved to the formation's center and began producing a series of complex vocalizations. "Are they communicating?" Webb asked. "More than that," Kess breathed, her understanding crystallizing with the uncomfortable clarity that accompanied paradigm shifts. "They're trying to surrender." "Surrender?" Torres's voice cracked with disbelief. "To what?" Kess looked down at the bow in her hands, its dark surface now pulsing with rhythmic phosphorescence that matched her heartbeat exactly. The carved inscriptions along the grip had begun glowing again, but this time she could read them. "To their creators," she whispered. The largest war beast raised its massive head and produced a sound that no universal translator could render. Part vocalization, part harmonic resonance, part something that bypassed language entirely and communicated directly with whatever part of her brain the bow had been designed to interface with. The message was simple, profound, and absolutely terrifying. Recognition, acknowledgement, submission. "They know what I am," Kess said, her voice barely audible over the sound of her own pulse. They know what humans are. Dr. Drakmore, Thax 9 said carefully, perhaps you should clarify that statement. Kess set the bow down with elaborate care, her hands shaking as the full implications crashed over her like a collapsing building. The hegemony. Everyone spends so much time studying their technology, their military doctrine, their disappearance, but nobody ever asks the obvious question. Which is, what did they look like? Webb stared at her with the expression of someone watching a trusted friend announce their intention to juggle live. Grenades! Kess, what are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm stating a fact that should have been obvious from the beginning. She gestured toward the war beasts, still maintaining their submissive formation. These creatures weren't designed as weapons. They were designed as weapons for a specific enemy. The hegemony's enemies? No, Marcus. The hegemony's weapons. Against us. The silence that followed contained enough uncomfortable realization to power a small fusion reactor. Torres, Thax 9, and Webb regarded Kess with the collective expression of people who'd just discovered their reality had been constructed from lies and wishful thinking. You're claiming, Thax 9 said slowly, that humans are the hegemony? I'm claiming that humans are what's left of the hegemony. Scattered, reduced, our technology lost, our empire collapsed, but still carrying the biological signatures that these weapons recognize. She picked up the bow again, feeling its interface systems respond to her touch with eager recognition. This isn't some impossible alien technology. This is human technology, designed by humans, for humans to use against enemies we've forgotten we ever fought. The war beasts remained motionless, waiting. Their behavior now made perfect sense, not as independent biological weapons, but as military assets recognizing the return of their commanding species. The stasis pods, Webb said quietly. They weren't preserving the creatures. They were preserving them for deployment when their creators returned. Emergency protocols. If the hegemony ever came back, the weapons would be ready. Commander Torres cleared his throat diplomatically. Dr. Drakmore, assuming your theory is correct, what do we do with 47 war beasts that apparently recognize human authority? Kess smiled, the expression carrying enough ironic satisfaction to illuminate a small city. We do what the hegemony always did, Commander. We adapt, we overcome, and we remember that sometimes the best way to solve a problem is to realize it was never actually a problem at all. She raised the bow toward the assembled creatures and spoke a single word in the ancient hegemony language that her interface connection had somehow taught her. The war beasts bowed. 3 hours later, as evacuation transports departed Kepler 442C with their cargo of confused colonists and equally confused military personnel, Kess stood on the observation deck, reviewing her mission report. 47 war beasts had returned to stasis voluntarily. The colony could be rebuilt. The immediate crisis was resolved. None of which addressed the larger question of what it meant to discover that humanity's greatest archaeological mystery was actually humanity's forgotten heritage. So, Webb said, joining her at the viewport, what do we tell people? That the galaxy's most studied ancient civilization was actually us all along? Kess looked down at the bow case, its contents, representing 20 million credits worth of recovered human technology that everyone had assumed belonged to mysterious aliens. Marcus, she said finally, I think we tell them that sometimes the most important discoveries are the ones that remind us who we really are. Outside the viewport, Kepler 442c rotated slowly beneath twin moons, its surface scarred by a conflict that had finally ended 12,000 years after it began. In the planet's northern continent, ancient stasis facilities powered down for the first time since the hegemony's collapse, their guardians finally at rest. The auction house crowd had been right about one thing. The bow really was a magnificent specimen of pre-hegemony craftsmanship. They'd just been wrong about which species constituted pre-hegemony.